As we finish up here talking about our prokaryotes, talking about our archaea and our bacteria, the last things we want to hit on is their importance to the environment, their importance to the biosphere, and their importance actually to humans. So Concept 27.5 says prokaryotes play a crucial role in the biosphere. And as a matter of fact, we oftentimes think about humans as being very important, or at least, of course, we're very important to our own selves. But if humans were to go extinct next week, most of the world would continue on. As a matter of fact, there would be perhaps certain portions of the environment in certain portions of the world that might even benefit from that. But if prokaryotes were to disappear, if they were to go extinct tomorrow, the prokaryotes basically are the underpinning for a lot of the various biosphere and ecosystem things that we have going on. So if the prokaryotes were to disappear tomorrow, the prospects for any other life surviving would be pretty slim. One of the key things that prokaryotes do for the environment, for the biosphere in general, is chemical recycling. Prokaryotes play a major role in the recycling of chemical elements between the living and the non-living parts of an ecosystem. Chemoheterotrophic prokaryotes function as decomposers. They break down dead bodies, they break down what used to be living materials, and through that process they release and unlock elements such as carbon and nitrogen that then can be recycled and reused to create new life. Prokaryotes can sometimes increase the availability of certain elements like nitrogen and phosphorus and potassium and free them up to be better used by other living creatures such as plants and animals. But it can work the other way too. Sometimes prokaryotes actually kind of lock up and immobilize or decrease the availability of certain nutrients. So it's a pretty complex role that they play in the interaction, especially with soils and plants and the different nutrients that the plants need in the soils. But mainly, one of their main roles in this chemical recycling is as decomposers. So when when a dog dies and its body begins to decompose, all of the chemical elements that make up that dog's body, for those elements to be freed and released, that body has to be decomposed and broken down, and oftentimes it's prokaryotes, archaea, and bacteria that do that job. This little lab activity shown in the book, figure 27-18, shows the impact of bacteria on soil nutrient availability. So they did a quick little experiment growing plants, little seedlings, in the lab using soil that either had no bacteria in it or there were 3 different strains of bacteria added to the soil. And you can see that in all cases the strains of bacteria that were added to the soil were of a benefit to the plants. They in some way released nutrients or made nutrients more available to the plants. And you can see like strain 3 actually did a much greater version, a much better method or way of releasing nutrients and allowing those nutrients to be taken up by the plant. So this is the case oftentimes where prokaryotes form this relationship with other living creatures, and in this case it's a beneficial relationship to the plants. One of the other ways that prokaryotes affect the ecology of a system is through various types of interactions called symbiosis. Symbiosis is an ecological relationship between 2 different species that live in close contact with one another. The larger of those 2 is generally considered the host, and the smaller of those 2 is generally considered the symbiont. Prokaryotes often form symbiotic relationships with larger organisms, and you can kind of divide these relationships based on who benefits who. If it's mutualism, in mutualism both symbiotic organisms benefit, and there's lots of different examples of that. I'll show you one in just a second. In commensalism, one organism benefits while the other is not harmed or helped in any way. This, for example, describes generally the relationship between you and the bacteria that say live on the skin of your body. There are more than 150 species of bacteria that live on the surface of your body. That's up to 10 million cells, bacteria cells per square centimeter of skin. For the most part, these bacteria that live on your body, they don't harm you in any way, so you would consider this commensalism. The bacteria is getting a benefit. They're getting food and habitat from your body, and you're not really getting anything beneficial, but you're not being harmed either, so that would be commensalism. Then there's another one where it's not such a happy agreement. In parasitism, an organism called a parasite is harming but doesn't kill its host. A good example of that would be, say, in the larger, not the microscopic, but the larger world, Think about around Christmas time when you hang that mistletoe in a tree in a doorway and you're supposed to kiss underneath the mistletoe. Well, mistletoe is actually a type of parasite. It doesn't have roots of its own. You notice it grows in the trees. It grows into the tree and actually takes nutrients from the tree. So it is harming the tree. It doesn't kill the tree usually, but it does harm the tree, and it's a parasite to the tree. So shrink that down to the microscopic world, and sometimes you have different prokaryotic creatures that are parasites as well. And then a parasite sometimes passes on a disease or causes symptoms that we call a disease, and then it would be considered a pathogen as well. Here's a good example of mutualism where both the host and the symbiont are helped in some way. This little fish that you see here is called a flashlight fish, and it has an organ underneath its eye right here, and that organ contains a bioluminescent bacteria. The bacteria, through a chemical process, give off light, and so the fish uses this light to attract prey and to signal potential mates, and the bacteria receives nutrition or nutrients from the body of the fish. So this is mutualism. They're both getting something, they're both benefiting from this relationship between the bacteria and the fish. Sometimes it's not just individual creatures that are benefiting, sometimes it's entire ecological communities that kind of depend on the prokaryotic creatures. Think about a good example is at the bottom of the ocean floor where we have these hydrothermal vents. There is no sunlight that reaches down here to the bottom of the ocean. So what is going to be the start of the food chain? You can't have plants, which are normally the producers that we think of that start off most food chains. Instead, you have prokaryotes, prokaryotic creatures that are chemiotrophic. In other words, they're not living off of sunlight. They're living off of the chemicals that are produced from this deep sea vent, and they're using those chemicals to produce their food. Well, then the bacteria serve as the basis for the food chain, and then there are worms and other creatures that eat the bacteria, and then there are clams and snails and crabs and fish. So you have an entire community of living creatures that are basically dependent upon these bacteria and these archaea, and they are the basis of the food chain. If that were to collapse, if for example the vent for some reason stops, if the volcanic activity ceases, well then the chemicals are no longer being provided to the chemiotrophic bacteria, and once they're gone, everyone else is going to be gone too. They would have to move off, move away, or die off because the base of the food chain would be gone. So in this case, the prokaryote is basically holding up the entire ecological community. Alright, we'll take one last quick break and then we'll come back and talk about the benefit or harmful impact of prokaryotes on human beings, and we'll finish up the chapter.